Some men walk into a room like they own it. Others walk in and destroy it without even realizing. That was the day Trent Colburn arrived, and everything started to unravel. My name is Caleb Rains. I'm 47 years old, and up until 2 weeks ago, I was the Director of Systems Architecture at Cinderbyte Technologies. I'm not the loudest guy in the room. I don't chase titles or play politics. What I do is build the systems that make everything work when everyone else is panicking. I'd been at Cinderbyte for nearly 9 years. I'd survived 2 CEOs, 4 reorganizations, and 1 near-bankruptcy acquisition. I knew how to stay quiet, how to stay essential. I'd built our back-end infrastructure from the ground up. And when I say built, I mean designed, coded, optimized, patented. It kept the company running 24/7. And 82% of operations still relied on that system today. But none of that mattered when he showed up. Trent Colburn, new CEO, 38, MBA from Stanford. The kind of man who quotes Steve Jobs without understanding how a login system works. He walked into the main office like it was already his. Custom suit, perfect hair, Rolex glinting under fluorescent lights. He smiled wide and rehearsed. "Call me Trent," he said, as if that would somehow make him relatable. "I like things lean, fast, and efficient. We're going to do great things starting now." And just like that, the air changed. A beat of silence. Then, that forced applause you only hear in all-hands meetings or kindergarten recitals. People clapped because they had to. I didn't. I just crossed my arms and watched. Not with anger, not with fear. Just with the kind of quiet that comes from seeing this exact story before. Trent started strong. By strong, I mean chaotic. He canceled our weekly tech reviews and replaced them with something called vision syncs. He started reorganizing teams he didn't understand. By Thursday, 3 mid-level managers were gone. 2 of them got the news by email. And on Friday, Trent made his biggest mistake yet. He started rewriting the roadmap for Orion OS, our company's core infrastructure. The system I had built. The one I had personally patented under my own name. Most people don't know this, but patents can be protected even inside corporate ecosystems if you negotiate smart. And I did. My employment contract buried in the fine print made it clear Cinderbyte could license the system. But the intellectual property that stayed with me. It was a protective clause suggested by our old CEO who once told me, "Caleb, if you ever walk out of here, this whole place might go with you." He said it as a joke. I didn't take it that way. But Trent never read the contract. He barely knew what my actual title was. He started calling me tech lead instead of director of systems architecture. He interrupted me in meetings, ignored every suggestion I made, then turned around and praised junior staff for repeating my words 5 minutes later. It was textbook power play, diminish, discredit, dismiss. But I didn't bite. I didn't yell. I didn't correct him in front of the team. I just started documenting everything. Then came Friday morning, 9:02 a.m. Trent walked into my office like he was starring in a bad corporate drama. Didn't even sit down. Just leaned on the doorframe and said, "Caleb, I'm going to be blunt. That's the tone men use when they think they're doing you a favor. You've been here a long time. Maybe too long. Things are changing, and we need people who move at a different pace. Effective immediately, your role is being eliminated. HR has your severance paperwork." He didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even pause long enough to pretend he respected the decision. Just stood there smug and satisfied like he was doing spring cleaning. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for an explanation. I just smiled. Calm, measured, deliberate. "Understood," I said. I stood, extended my hand. He didn't take it, just turned and walked out. And as he left, he tossed one last gem over his shoulder. "I'm not about to spend money on an employee who peaked 5 years ago." That line stuck with me not because it hurt, but because it proved how little he understood the system that was still running under his feet. The system that required my consent to keep functioning legally. But I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I packed up slowly photos of my daughter, the plant I'd somehow kept alive through 5 winters, a USB stick with nothing on it but vacation photos from our last team off-site. Nobody said anything. A few glanced up from their screens. Some looked away embarrassed. That's how fear moves through companies like Cinderbyte quietly. By the time I got to my car, my hands were trembling. Not from sadness, not from fear, from adrenaline. Because while Trent was celebrating, I already knew what Monday would bring. The office felt colder when I left. Not literally, just emptier, quieter. Like something had shifted in the foundation and no one knew it yet. I drove home without music. Didn't call anyone, didn't text. I wasn't ready to explain it, especially not to my daughter. She just turned 16. She still thought her dad was invincible. When I walked through the door, she looked up from the kitchen counter, brows raised. "You're home early." I forced a small smile. "Long story." She nodded, didn't push. Just slid a cup of coffee toward me. I raised her on logic, but she's always been intuitive. She knew something was off. Later that night, when she went to bed, I sat in my home office, the one room I kept untouched by the rest of the world. Books, whiteboard, a second monitor hooked up to my personal rig, and a locked file cabinet. I opened it. Inside, everything I needed. My original IP filing. The employment contract signed and notarized. The licensing agreement between Cinderbyte and myself tucked behind a letter from the previous CEO that read, "If this ever becomes necessary, use it with precision, not emotion." He knew. He'd seen the cycle before. New leadership, big words, small minds. I reread the clause slowly, like I was tasting each word. Orion OS backend infrastructure is licensed under agreement with the author Caleb Rains. All system updates, scaling modifications, or continued deployment beyond contractual renewal date shall require written consent from the patent holder. There it was. Consent. That word had power. And the date. The license expired in 3 days. Sunday midnight. Trent didn't know it. Legal didn't know it. Hell, maybe no one remembered because the system just worked. Quiet. Flawless. Invisible. Like me. I closed the contract. Took a slow breath, and laughed. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I didn't need to fight. I just needed to wait. Saturday morning I woke early, took my coffee black. No sugar, no distractions. Then I opened a blank email. To Cinderbyte Legal CC HR CTO, and yes, Trent Colburn. Subject line: Notice of Intellectual Property Usage Expiration. Immediate action required. I kept it short. Professional. Unemotional. Per the licensing agreement signed on date, the company's right to utilize the Orion OS backend infrastructure will expire at 11:59 p.m. this Sunday. Continued use beyond that date without renewed consent will constitute a breach of intellectual property law. I am open to discussing licensing options moving forward. Please direct future correspondence to this email. Caleb Rains, patent holder, U.S. patent number 9812456A. I didn't send it right away. I read it 3 times. Then I hit send, and just like that I flipped the timer. The rest of the weekend passed like a storm you can feel but not see. Heavy, still, charged. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. Not my daughter, not my old co-workers, not even Jordan, my closest ally in the engineering team. I needed silence, not celebration. This wasn't revenge, it was a reset. Saturday afternoon, I took a long walk past the old downtown data center where Orion OS had first gone live. No one remembered those nights now. 2 servers, overheating cables running across the floor like veins, me sleeping under my desk, with coffee breath and a 6-line Python fix in my pocket. But I remembered. I always would. Because I didn't just build that system. I bled for it. Sunday night I didn't sleep much. At 11:58 p.m., I sat by the window watching streetlights flicker. I pictured Trent, blissfully unaware, dreaming of charts and LinkedIn metrics, while the core of his empire was ticking toward shutdown. Midnight came. No sound, no explosion, just silence. But I knew. By morning it would be loud. Very loud. I was up before the sun. Didn't need an alarm. Didn't need coffee. I just sat at my desk, hoodie on, laptop open, personal phone charged, and waited. It was 7:43 a.m. I opened a second tab. 1 for email. 1 for the news. I wanted to see how long it would take before the first domino fell. At 8:07 a.m. it started. My inbox lit up. Urgent. Orion OS backend authentication failed. Critical. Client dashboards. Unresponsive. Priority 1. API timeout across environments. I kept scrolling. One email after another, each more frantic than the last. Then, A name I recognized. Nicole from HR, voicemail. Hi, Caleb. We're hoping to clarify some things regarding your separation agreement. Please call us back as soon as possible. Another call, this time from legal. Then another. Then another. And finally, Trent. Subject line urgent, contract misunderstanding. Caleb, I believe there's been a miscommunication. I'd like to speak with you directly to resolve this before business hours escalate. Please call me ASAP. Business hours have escalated, Trent. By 8:31, my phone was buzzing nonstop. I let it ring, let the silence answer for me. Then came a text. Jordan, my guy in DevOps. Bro, did you do this? Please tell me you did this. Max is losing it. I didn't reply, but I smiled. Not out of malice, out of clarity. This wasn't sabotage. I didn't hack anything. I didn't touch a single line of code after I left. This was what happened when people in power ignored the systems that held them up and the people who built them. They'd fired the architect and expected the building to stand. At 9:12 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Caleb Trent's voice cracked through the line, tight, strained, frantic beneath the surface. We need to talk. Morning, Trent. There's been some confusion about the licensing situation. I wasn't aware of the expiration. Let's get you back in the office, and I cut him off gently. I'm happy to talk, I said. But not about a job. We're discussing licensing now. As an external partner. Silence. Then softer, more desperate, he tried again. Let's not make this personal. Oh, it's not, I replied. It's contractual. And I hung up. I took a sip of coffee, stood from my chair, and walked to the closet. I pulled out the one suit I still kept pressed. Not for funerals, not for weddings, but for moments like this. Because today, I wasn't coming back. I was walking in. At 10:02 a.m. I parked in the executive lot. Not because I was supposed to. Because I could. Nobody stopped me. Nobody dared. I stepped out of my car, buttoned my jacket, and walked through the front lobby of Cinderbyte Technologies for the first time in years. I didn't take the side entrance. Didn't badge in like staff. I walked in through the glass doors under the brushed steel logo like I had something to sell. Because I did. Their entire company. The receptionist, new girl, maybe 25, looked up confused. Hi, can I help? Then she saw my name. Mr. Rains. I smiled. I have a meeting with legal. She blinked, then nodded, hands trembling slightly as she picked up the phone and dialed. The tension in the room shifted fast. People who were pretending not to listen suddenly weren't typing. I didn't look at them. I didn't have to. She hung up. 7th floor. They're waiting for you. The elevator was slow but deliberate. Just like me, I caught my reflection in the mirrored panel. Not the tired engineer they'd written off. Not the guy in the corner who built quietly while others postured. I looked like a man with leverage. Because that's exactly what I was. The doors opened. Legal was ready. 3 of them. General counsel, 2 associates, and a senior advisor I recognized from the acquisition years ago. No Trent. He didn't show. Not yet. Good. Let him stew. I walked into the boardroom and took the far seat, the one they usually save for execs. I didn't ask. They didn't stop me. The general counsel cleared his throat. Caleb, thank you for coming in. Of course, I said. Calm. Controlled. I prefer to handle important conversations face to face. He nodded. We've reviewed your notice. Your claims are valid. The licensing agreement expired Sunday at 11:59 p.m. You are the legal patent holder for Orion OS. Continued use without your consent constitutes a breach. He paused, then leaned forward. We'd like to propose a retroactive licensing extension. 1 year. Same terms. Full access. I let the offer hang in the air. Then I smiled. That won't work for me. A murmur swept across the table. One associate wrote something in her notes. The general counsel's posture shifted. What are you proposing? He asked. I opened my folder, slid over a document. Simple, clean, precise. $1.2 million for 12 months of usage. Quarterly renewals. All system updates to go through me or a consulting team I approve. And public attribution. Full name, full credit. On internal and external documentation. He blinked. That's a significant increase. It's a fair one, I replied. Reflective of value. No one argued. Because they knew. They weren't just buying code. They were renting survival. The general counsel leaned back in his chair. We'll need to take this to the board. I'll wait, I said simply. But just so we're clear, every hour of delay costs you trust uptime and investor confidence. I suggest moving quickly. I stood, walked to the lounge outside the boardroom, poured a glass of water, and that's when I saw him. Trent, standing at the end of the hall, pacing jaw-tight, phone in hand. He didn't see me at first. Then he did. And for a moment, he froze. That ego-driven fire in his eyes, gone. What replaced it was something rarer in men like him. Recognition. He walked over slowly, carefully, like he was afraid I might explode. "Caleb," he said, trying to force civility. "I didn't expect you'd come in person." "No, Trent," I replied. "You didn't expect a lot of things." He chuckled nervously. "We should have had a conversation before the lawyers got involved." "You mean before you fired me?" I said. His jaw twitched. It was a strategic decision, based on incomplete information. "No," I said, stepping forward. "It was based on ego. And now you're dealing with the consequences." He opened his mouth again. I didn't let him speak. "I'm not angry, Trent. I'm just done being underestimated." He looked away. I walked past him, and just before I turned the corner, I said it. "Good luck." Same words I'd used the day he fired me. Only now, he understood what they meant. At 10:58 a.m., I was called back into the boardroom. This time the atmosphere was tighter, the air heavier. Like everyone knew they were sitting on top of a crack in the ice. The general counsel had taken off his jacket. His tie was slightly loosened. The two associates didn't look up when I walked in. The senior advisor was back flipping through a printed spreadsheet like it might save him. Still no Trent. The chair across from me was empty. I sat down slowly, deliberately. The general counsel leaned forward. "We've reviewed your proposal." He paused, choosing his next words with the kind of care usually reserved for courtrooms and landmines. "While we find the terms aggressive," I cut in calm but firm. "Accurate," he blinked, then nodded. "Accurate. We're prepared to accept the $1.2 million licensing rate. Quarterly renewal. Full operational access through you or an approved consulting partner." I waited. I knew there was a but coming. He cleared his throat. "We'd like to propose a slight modification on the attribution point. We're open to acknowledging your contribution, but would prefer to phrase it as a technical collaboration, not a full patent credit." I smiled, but it wasn't warm. I leaned in just slightly. "No." The word landed like a gavel. Their eyes shifted. "I'm not negotiating recognition," I said. "The system ran on my architecture for 6 years. While others were presenting at product fairs, I was in the trenches keeping this company online. I want it stated clearly and publicly, system designed and patented by Caleb Rains. Not assisted, not inspired by, not some sanitized PR-friendly footnote." Silence. The advisor scribbled something again. One associate looked like she might speak, then didn't. The general counsel finally said, "We'll take that to the board." "Do that," I replied. I stood, gathered my folder, and just before walking out I added, "And while you're at it, be transparent. Because the SEC doesn't like surprises, especially when it comes to undisclosed licensing conflicts that directly impact infrastructure and investor data integrity." That hit hard, because behind all the boardroom banter, there's one language every executive truly understands: regulatory risk. Back in the hallway, I didn't sit. I paced. I'd been calm all morning, controlled, steady. But this was the moment I had waited for. Not to punish, but to define. I wouldn't just leave with a payout. I'd leave with the truth. At 11:17 a.m., Nicole texted me. "They're calling you the firewall upstairs. People are watching. Even interns are whispering. Trent's freaking out. Told the board you never informed him about the licensing deadline." "But, Caleb, we saw the memo. You CC'd legal. You time-stamped everything." I stared at the screen. That was the moment it hit me. I didn't need to raise my voice. I had the paper trail, and the building was listening. At exactly 12:03 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't legal. It wasn't Trent. It was from the board chair himself. "Subject closed session invite, 10 p.m. today. Caleb. We'd appreciate your presence for a private session with the board. Your insight will be valuable to the discussion. Arthur Keene." I stared at the email for a long moment, not because I was surprised, but because of that one word. Valuable. 2 weeks ago I was outdated, too slow, a redundant role. And now I was invited to the top floor. At 12:58 p.m., I stepped into the executive boardroom 22nd floor south glass wall view of the entire downtown skyline, the room where decisions are made, where careers are launched, and sometimes quietly ended. I'd only been in there once before, 6 years ago, to pitch the first version of Orion OS. Back then, I stood near the wall, laptop in hand, waiting to be dismissed by men in suits who didn't know the difference between a front end and a firewall. Today, I was led straight to the table. No laptop. Just me. The board chair stood. "Caleb," he said. "Thank you for joining." He gestured to the seat across from him. I sat. Around me were 7 people. Cinderbite's highest decision-makers. Their faces were neutral, but their posture wasn't. They were bracing. Mr. Rains Arthur began. "We've reviewed the licensing documents, internal communications, and your patent filing." He tapped the folder in front of him. "We'd like to hear your perspective. Briefly, before we deliberate further." I nodded. I didn't open my folder. I didn't need notes. I just looked at each of them, one by one. And then I spoke. "Leadership," I said, "isn't about power. It's about clarity. About knowing what holds your company together technically and humanly. When a new executive walks into a system they don't understand, they have 2 choices. They listen, or they bulldoze." Trent bulldozed. No one interrupted. I continued. "He called me irrelevant, fired me without a single systems review, and then ignored the legal foundation his entire product line depended on. He didn't ask how it worked. He didn't ask who built it. He just assumed it would keep running because it always had. And when it stopped running, he panicked and tried to blame the very hands that held the company up." Silence. Then one board member leaned forward. "Caleb, she asked if you were in Trent's seat. What would you have done differently?" I gave a small, honest smile. "I wouldn't be in his seat." That surprised them. I let it hang for a moment, then clarified. "I'd be beside someone who understands product and people and risk. And I'd be building systems that don't just work, but protect the people who build them. Because no line of code can save a company from arrogance." The board chair nodded slowly. "Thank you, Caleb. That was clear." He folded his hands. "We'll deliberate in private now. Please wait outside. We'll call you back shortly." I stood. Of course. And as I walked out of that room, the same room I once stood invisible in, I knew something had changed. Not just in the story, but in how it would be told. I waited outside the boardroom for 14 minutes. I didn't pace. Didn't check my phone. I just stood by the window, watching a pigeon land on the ledge, bobbing its head like it had no idea it was a witness to the most important meeting of my career. Then I heard it. Voices. Not mine, Trent's. Through the wall raised frantic defensive. Words like oversight, legal misunderstanding, and not my fault cut through the glass like static on an open mic. He was unraveling. Blaming legal. Blaming HR. Blaming me. His last play, deflection. But this time, no one was buying it. At 1:27 p.m., the boardroom door opened. Arthur Keene stepped out, his expression unreadable. "Caleb," he said, "we'd like to speak with you privately." I followed him in. This time Trent's chair was empty, and that told me everything I needed to know. Arthur waited for the door to close. Then he sat, folded his hands, looked me straight in the eye. "Effective immediately," he said, "Trent Colburn has been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into recent management decisions." The room was silent, not tense, relieved. He slid a paper across the table, a draft of an internal announcement. I read the first line out loud. "Cinderbite Technologies formally recognizes Caleb Rains as the architect and patent holder of the Orion OS infrastructure. His contributions are foundational to the continued stability and success of our operations." For a moment, I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my entire career, they said it, not me. Arthur leaned back. "How would you like to proceed?" I looked down at the paper, then up at the board. "I've already agreed to the licensing deal," I said, "but I'd like to offer consulting short-term. No full-time return, no press releases, just autonomy, and a chance to help you build something that lasts." He nodded. "Consider it done." I stood, and just before I left, he added one final thing. "Caleb, you didn't just protect the system, you saved the company." I didn't say anything back, not because I was speechless, but because I finally didn't need to prove anything anymore. Outside the boardroom, Nicole was waiting near the elevators. She looked up wide-eyed. "He's gone," she whispered. I nodded. She grinned. "They're calling it executive leave, but we all know what that means." I smiled, but it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like completion. We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then she asked, what are you gonna do now?" I glanced toward the floor below, toward the systems I once built in silence, toward the place where my name had finally landed. And I said, "I'm just getting started." That Friday at 2:03 p.m. the announcement went live. A single internal memo. Short, simple, surgical. Effective immediately, Maxwell Trent Colburn has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Cinderbyte Technologies formally acknowledges Caleb Rains as the architect and patent holder of the Orion OS infrastructure. His licensing agreement has been renewed. His contributions are vital to our recovery and ongoing stability. It hit like a thunderclap. The same people who had once walked past me without eye contact now looked me in the eye, not out of fear, out of respect. Whispers became nods. Nods became congratulations. And still I didn't celebrate, because recognition wasn't the finish line. It was the foundation. The following Monday, I met with legal again, but not to finalize my payout. This time I brought a proposal, a new internal framework, something I called the integrity stack. 4 pillars: automatic IP contract reviews during leadership transitions, anonymous whistleblower reporting tied directly to board oversight, internal training on IP ownership contribution, attribution, and legal boundaries, and a mentorship program for junior engineers focused on protecting your work before someone tries to erase it. I told them you can't prevent arrogance, but you can build guardrails so it doesn't crash the entire system. They approved it unanimously. One board member even said if we'd had this 2 months ago, we wouldn't be in cleanup mode. I didn't say I told you so. I just nodded and kept building. For the next 90 days, I worked as a consulting architect. My hours, my terms, no titles, no politics. I onboarded the new lead engineer, walked her through every blind spot Trent never cared to ask about. She listened, took notes. And on her 3rd day, she said, "This system, it's beautiful. Not flashy, but it thinks ahead." I smiled. That's the best compliment a builder can get. People kept asking me if I was coming back full-time. The answer, no. Not because I was bitter, not because I didn't love the work, but because once you've seen how fragile trust is, you don't sit in someone else's house hoping it holds. You build your own. 2 weeks into the transition, I stepped outside the building after a long meeting. The sky was the color of old denim, warm breeze, and quiet. As I stood by the sidewalk, a group of interns passed by laughing, coffee and hand badge lanyards swinging. One of them, a young woman with oversized glasses and a nervous smile, paused. "Excuse me, are you Caleb Rains?" I turned. "I am." Her face lit up. "I just wanted to say, thank you. What you did, everyone's talking about it in the Slack channels." She hesitated. "You made it okay for people like me to speak up." I looked at her. Young, talented. Exactly the kind of person systems forget until they break them. I smiled gently. "Then keep speaking up," I said. "Don't wait for permission." She nodded, then ran to catch up with her group. I stood there for a long while, not with pride, with something deeper. Legacy. Not the kind you put on a resume, the kind that lasts. 90 days. That's how long I stayed. Long enough to stabilize the code, train the new team, review every line of logic that had once lived only in my head. By the end of it, the systems were humming again. But more importantly, so were the people. No more walking on eggshells, no more just be grateful silence. The fear was gone. On my last day, I packed up the same way I had the first time, slowly, methodically. But this time, there was no shame, no confusion, no bitterness, only purpose. As I passed through the atrium, I saw someone updating the wall display, the digital screen that listed key contributors to core products. For the first time since Orion OS launched, there it was. Caleb Rains, lead architect, Orion OS stack patent, US 9812456A. I stood there for a moment, long enough to let it sink in. That line didn't make me proud. It made me calm, because now it would never be erased. That weekend, I finalized the launch of my own consulting firm. No big name, no flashy branding. Just Rain Systems Advisory Architecture with accountability. We don't just fix systems. We protect the people who build them. By month's end, I had 2 signed clients, a mid-sized fintech in Chicago and a nonprofit software org in Portland that had lost 3 devs to burnout in the last quarter. Both didn't need flash. They needed resilience, and someone who wouldn't speak above their teams but for them. One afternoon, about a month after I left Cinderbite for good, I got a message from Nicole. Thought you'd want to know leadership's changing some policies. Attribution now required on all product documentation. Exit interviews now go to the board. And there's a new internal Slack channel called Chadal Built Bias. Credit where it's due. Finally. I didn't reply right away. I just leaned back in my chair. Not with satisfaction. With peace. I didn't need to torch the place on my way out. I didn't need revenge, or a spotlight, or even an apology. I had something better. Proof. Proof that quiet power is still power. Proof that the system doesn't always get the last word. It was a Thursday morning when the email came in. From Arthur Keene, board chair. The same man who had once thanked me for saving the company. The subject line was simple. Private discussion. Request for consideration. No panic. No urgency. Just quiet formality. I opened it. Caleb. The board is entering strategic talks regarding Cinderbite's future leadership structure. Your name has been raised multiple times as a potential candidate for the CEO role. Would you be open to a conversation? Arthur? I sat back in my chair, not surprised, not flattered, just still, because I knew what this meant. They weren't looking for a leader. They were looking for a savior. Again. I didn't respond right away. I went for a walk. No music, no phone, just the streets I'd walked 100 times before. I passed the old coffee shop where I'd taken 6 a.m. bug calls. Past the train tracks where I used to call my daughter after long shifts. Memories not of failure, but of foundation. Of building something from zero. And I asked myself, did I want to rebuild this company? Or let it finally stand without me? That night I called Nicole. We hadn't spoken in a few weeks. She picked up fast. Hey, thought you went full hermit mode. I'm getting there, I said. But I got a message today, from Arthur. She paused. That message. So, everyone knows. Rumor is they're trying to undo the culture Trent broke, but they don't know how. And they want me to come back, I said. As CEO, she asked. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. She didn't answer right away. Then she said softly, we need someone like you. But maybe not someone who's already carried it all once. That hit me, because she was right. Sometimes the best thing a builder can do isn't to stay. It's to leave behind blueprints strong enough for others to follow. The next morning, I sent my reply. Short, direct, respectful. Arthur, I appreciate the offer, but I have to decline. My time with Cinderbite was meaningful. But my path now is about empowering others, not returning to clean up what I already fixed. I wish you well. And I hope you continue protecting the systems and people that keep you standing. Caleb. That afternoon, I took a long drive up the coast. No GPS, just instinct. And at a small overlook just past the cliffs, I parked. Watched the waves roll in, steady, relentless, unapologetic. I opened my notebook, the same one I'd used for system sketches and contract notes, and wrote a single sentence. When you stop building for survival, you start building for meaning. A week after I turned down the CEO seat, the news broke. Cinderbite's Eastern Division had been acquired. Quiet deal, no headlines, just a footnote in the financial press. Cinderbite Technologies sells regional operations to private investment group. Sources say the move was influenced by recent internal restructuring following the departure of key talent. I didn't need sources to tell me what that meant. They were shedding weight to survive, cutting the arm to save the heart, and once again, trying to rebuild a machine without its engineer. 3 days later, I got a call from one of my old clients. Mid-sized banking platform. We hadn't spoken in months. Caleb, the CTO, said we heard what happened. We're not renewing with Cinderbite. I raised an eyebrow. You sure? They raised prices. Response times slower. But more than that. You're not there anymore. And what we really trusted was you. He paused. We'd like to move our stack under your consultancy. Full migration. You name the terms. I didn't respond right away, because once again, I hadn't chased them. They came to me. By the end of the month, 2 more clients followed. Then a 4th. Then a 5th. Each of them said the same thing. We don't just want your code. We want your way of building. Not fast, not cheap, but resilient, respectful, right? One morning I opened my inbox to find an unexpected message from an engineering lead at a Fortune 500 company. We studied your Cinderbite case in a leadership training last week. They're calling it the RAINS model. Quiet correction over public chaos. Documentation as armor. Silence as strategy. I read the words 3 times, not because I didn't believe them, but because they finally believed me. That weekend I walked past the old Cinderbite building. The lobby looked the same. The badge scanner still blinked red by default. A few new faces walked in. A few old ones walked out. But the air felt different. Not tense, just learning. And that was enough. That night, I pulled out the drawer where I'd once kept my severance paperwork. Now it held something else. The first printed proposal from my consulting firm, the patent certificate for Orion OS, and a handwritten letter from Arthur Keene. Caleb, you changed how we think about leadership. Not by taking power, but by refusing to surrender your value when no one else saw it. I closed the drawer gently and exhaled, because for the first time in my career, I wasn't being asked to prove myself. I was being followed, not by position, but by principle. 1 year later, I was on a train out of the city. No laptop, no deadline, no emergency calls. Just a window seat, a worn leather notebook, and a silence I hadn't heard in years. The landscape blurred past steel concrete trees' distance. Behind me, a chapter that didn't end with applause but with clarity. Cinderbite survived. Barely. The systems I left behind kept them standing long enough to learn how to walk again. I didn't return. Didn't watch from afar. Didn't wait for more apologies. I had moved on. Not out of pride, out of peace. My firm had grown. 4 clients became 9, then 12. Not because I advertised. Because engineers talk. Because people remember the ones who protect them when no one else will. We started mentoring programs. We launched an open-source library for IP awareness in startup teams. We advised investors on how to actually listen to the builders behind the metrics. We weren't loud, we weren't flashy, but we were respected, and we were never mistaken for redundant. One rainy Thursday, I received a letter. Not an email, not a LinkedIn message, a real letter. It was handwritten. The signature at the bottom, Nicole, Caleb, they still talk about you here. Every new hire hears the story. Every intern is handed the memo. They call it the firewall case. And once a year, we run a training called Know What You Own. We tell your story, we show your system, and we remind them, silence doesn't mean weakness, and calm doesn't mean surrender. Thank you for staying calm, and thank you for not staying silent. Nicole. I closed the letter and placed it beside the others. There weren't many, just enough to remind me. Legacy isn't built by what you demand, it's built by what you defend. That night I journaled, first time in months. I wrote a single line. I never asked for power. I asked for recognition. And when they refused to give it, I built my own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. To anyone out there who's ever been dismissed, called too much or too quiet or past your prime, you don't need permission to matter. You don't need applause to be right. You don't need to scream to hold power. You just need to know exactly who you are, and never let anyone write your story without your name in it.